I've learned a lot, and I've followed my passion.
It's Principles of Passion.
I have a dream.
With hosts Chris Thomas and Mickey Grace.
We really envision a world where all youth are inspired to find, define, and follow their passion.
This idea that we're going to be able to bring together so many creative thinkers, so many young people, and so many industry leaders.
In order to follow your dreams,
I have a dream today.
You have to put your passion first.
Coming up, Chris and Mickey sit down with Glennis Green, researcher, artivist, author, storyteller, and content creator. And with over 10 years of research experience and 15 years in the nonprofit sector, Glennis has been keenly focused on institutionalizing racial equity. This is Principles of Passion. Let's get it, y'all.
Welcome.
Hey.
What's up?
Hey. I just want to say I really love the intro. It's so official. I really like it.
Welcome, my boy Ernie.
One of those.
That's all, my boy Ernie. Those beats are by Swerve.
I love it. I just want to walk down the street and they're like, "Here comes Glennis Green."
Hey, yeah. We all need one of those in our life. Chris, how you doing?
Oh, just learning, Mickey, every day, learning and growing. How are you?
Pretty good. I'm sitting out here on the porch, chilling, hoping I don't get ate up by no mosquitoes. I'm really keeping my fingers crossed. But look, I'm super excited for this chat tonight. We got a really dope conversation and an even doper conversation. How you doing this evening?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you both for having me. This is great.
Of course. So I'm gonna go ahead and jump in and introduce Glennis and tonight's topic. Tonight we're gonna be talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion in the creative workforce. And our special guest for tonight is Glennis Green. Glennis is a researcher, artivist, author, storyteller, and content creator who uses various forms of tools for healing and liberation and systemic change. With over 10 years of research experience in the nonprofit sector, Glennis has been keenly focused on institutionalized racial equity. You may have seen some of her work across the city of Chicago. She's done so much in youth development, working on the board of Kumba Links, an urban youth arts and development organization that promotes hip hop and tools to reimagine and demonstrate a more just world. Glennis has a master's in sociology from Loyola University Chicago and DePaul University, respectively, and is currently in pursuit of her PhD. Come on, girl. What? That's what's up.
What? Tell us about all of that's like. I had to take a deep breath. That's a lot. What, like, of all of that, is there a piece that you love? Is there a piece, like, tell us?
Yeah, I just want to say so that my ramblers don't yell at me. So I just want to, I my bachelor's is from Loyola, my master's is from DePaul. So I don't want people like, oh, you didn't shout us out at DePaul. But yeah, it is a lot. Where shall we start? I guess the biggest thing for me is a lot of the work that I do, both as a content creator and as a scholar, is really around institutionalizing racial equity. So when I call myself an artivist, I use various art forms as tools of healing and liberation. So that's a part of the larger work that I do. And so that's pretty much the thread that really binds every aspect of my life.
So let me ask you this, and I'll just throw this up here because a lot of people, especially with what's going on with the world right now, you know, we've had injustices, right, for 400 years. So, but people are starting to really feel it right now. So when you look at some of that terminology, diversity, equity, inclusion, it could be real thrown around. Can you tell us a little bit more about kind of what your understanding is of those three terms?
Yeah, and I'll try to keep it really brief because I think that a lot of language is used and it just makes it more convoluted and less comprehensible to understand. Diversity for me is really about representation. So that is what it is. Like, if I look on TV, do I see people who look like me and represent, my narratives, my background, all of those things? I think about diversity. So when we're talking about it in that regard, in any aspect, mixed up, needs to be more representation. Equity is really about achieving fairness in the world. So a lot of times, and I think we're getting better at that as a culture, making a distinction between equity and equality. Equity is fairness, equality is sameness. We cannot achieve equality until we have achieved equity. So that means like that it is pertaining to access, opportunities, life outcomes, and chances. That's what equity is all about. And when I think about inclusion, it's really a sense of belonging, the culture of belonging, really, and the active contribution and participation of people. And so like those three things are distinct, and they all run together. Of like, if we have people of color in this space, then we're meeting our DEI. But that may not necessarily be the case if those people's ideas or contributions aren't being heard or processed or represented. And also, if we're not making room for them to have the same access to the kinds of opportunities that people who don't look like them have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so interesting because I think about, right, like diversity, equity, and inclusion. It seems like it has been the hottest topic, right? Like the hottest legitimate topic for a couple of years now. And I feel like maybe because I'm new to the space, this is new to me, but that it is becoming more of a conversation in creative workforces, more of a conversation in entertainment. So what are your thoughts on that? Do you feel like we have just gotten to the brink of really having a serious conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion in the creative workforce, in the entertainment agents, in the entertainment world? And if so, why did it take us this long to start having these conversations here?
I think we have just gotten to that conversation. I think many of us, who are deeply impacted by these things, have been having these conversations for a really long time. So when I say we, it's really more of a larger collective cultural we, not a subcultural we, really unique to the cultural or subcultural experiences of people of color or marginalized groups. So I just want to be clear about that distinction. But I do think that we are at the brink of having the conversation. And now that equity is like a hot button topic, then what the conversation that we are having isn't really about equity just yet, right? I think equity is such a hot thing that it's like, okay, equity, but we really mean diversity, or like equity, but we really mean like inclusion, or we really mean participation. And so I think we want to be, or just we really mean equality. So I think that there has to be more of a conversation about what those distinctions mean. And if we are going to fight for equity, which we should be, then that requires a whole different set of values. It requires a whole different set of legwork that many people and organizations, institutions across the nation may or may not be ready to do. But I think that because it's such a hot button topic, we're using it loosely, mostly in reference to diversity, and making sure that there's more representation, but not quite understanding that even with more representation, equity still has to be achieved.
Mickey, what you think? What you think of those three? Like, what kind of sticks out to you?
Well, equity, of course. I feel like and I feel like okay, so I really recently, in the past year and a half or so, really began to understand what equity really means and what equity really takes. So I heard Glennis say, it takes a lot of legwork, and yes, but I also think it takes a lot of emotional work that people who need to be helping us achieve equity are not really ready to do. So for example, right, I know everybody has seen that drawing of equity with the boxes and the boy looking over the fence.
Oh, I have.
Everybody has seen that. But I think the thing that we don't acknowledge is that it takes emotional work to get a person to give up their box. Get a person to give up their box. And that's why I really think for a long time, maybe the reason why this conversation has not been as loud in entertainment or creative spaces is because entertainment and creative spaces can do the magic of making you feel the thing. Like Glennis could put together a visual that moves you so emotionally where you get it, right? You get it. You get why I need to give up my box. Why I need to give up my box in the pursuit of equity. So that's my thought. I feel like that's my thought on those, and I feel like that's the reason why we are just now having this conversation in entertainment spaces.
And I think the world is requiring that of us, right? People, grassroots organizing, young people, they're demanding, they're requiring that of us, which is a very good thing. Like, I think it's a great thing. I think, you know, I'm in my 30s, but I'm still very much a millennial, and I think our generation, we are not our parents' generation, you know, and so what it was that we are likely to accept and deal with or tolerate is just very, very different. It's like, no, I'm a whole person and I demand to be treated as a whole person with respect and you know, all of these things that I know are available to me, like I want to be able to have an access. And that's not an unfair request, right? You know, because we're humans all fighting the same fight. And so I think that that's something for us to be mindful about. I love that you said the piece about the emotional labor, because I think that it's one of many strands, right? Like the cost of equity is a material, like financial cost. It is an emotional cost. It is a spiritual, mental, you know, physical cost. All of those things are very taxing, and that's why it's not the easiest to do. But that's why I say it's important to draw those lines and make those distinctions, because if those tolls aren't being paid, you're not doing the work of equity. If we're not remedying structures, you know, that are going to lead to impacts and outcomes, we're not doing the work of equity. We're just not. In my opinion, that's my thought.
And we appreciate that. It's a tough thing, you know. I think that the school system too, especially with COVID and looking at virtual and kids having to think about being taught at home again, I think that's really changing the lens of the way that we really look at that. Like, who has access to what they really need right now? Are they going to have it next year? Are kids going to have access to computers and stuff like that? So I think it's a good opportunity for us to really dive into that. On that note, when we're diving into that and looking at corporate as well, you know, most CEOs are not African American, right? And so how do we look at some of how those inequities show up in the workplace? Like, can you point to some times maybe where you've experienced in your past, and even for you too, Mickey, are there times where you guys can think of where you'd be like, that just didn't feel right, you know, or that's something they need to work on?
Yeah.
So, yeah, you know, do you want to go first? Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, you are right on the edge. I want to hear everything you have to say.
You know, I want to point, I guess I'll point towards, Chris, I think this is a great question. And I think for us to be having this conversation today, I think it's more important to really focus on those times when we felt like we did see equity happen in the workplace, right? Because reality of it is, you know, we have to begin modeling the kind of behavior that we want to see. So I think I may have told this story before, but my first job out of college, I worked with these two really dope guys. Like, they were young, they were just like on the edge of like cutting edge leadership, and I really don't even think they were ever trained. They were just authentic in the way they showed up at work and really cared. And I remember one day we were talking about something we did at work, and I had sent them an email and said, hey, I know we're having a meeting coming up. I was wondering if we should come up with a plan for reporting out, like what we're going to say in the meeting. And my manager emailed me back. He was like, yes, what do you think we should do? And as simple as that is, and as non-traditional as that is, I think that is a way to push for equity, because it's power sharing, right? Equitable power sharing. So to be able to say, well, what do you think we should do? So that I'm not the one at the table all the time running my gums about what happened and where we were successful and what do we think we should do differently. So I think, equitable power sharing is one like really successful way I've seen equity be demonstrated in the workplace.
I love that. I love
I
that.
love that. I love that. I think that that's a really, really good. That's a really, really good one. I'm trying to think of like some really, really good examples. That's a little different from that one.
So while you're thinking, I'll kind of give one.
Yeah.
At my last company, I was at Advanced Group, which is a group of staffing firms. And I was on the diversity inclusion board and then the volunteering committee. And there was an event that came up that I wanted to really push. And I thought that it was an opportunity for our organization to really help out the community, help some young adults out. And I looked around the room of the people voting, and it wasn't a very diverse room, to say the least. I think I was maybe one of two Black people out of maybe 10, 15 people. And so I pitched my idea. It didn't go so well. It kind of, they passed on it. They decided to go with something that had to do with like lakes and earths, and I was trying to do community. And so I went to the I didn't go the owner first, but that was my second. I went to the director of HR and I was like, hey, here's my opinion. Here's where I'm stating this could be beneficial for the organization. Kind of, what do you think? And she listened. She really listened. It ended up going up to the CEO. He listened to me. He heard my voice. Wow. He ended up giving the donation to the organization. And like, just to be heard is such a beautiful thing. I think the challenge is a lot of us that are young, when I was young, I think we don't have that confidence to say, like, no, I really believe this. I'm really going to push for this, even at the risk of losing my job right now, because I feel that this is right. And not that that was me risking my job, but it was me risking a light that I was going to be put in by feeling like, am I being like too Black power right now? Am I trying to be? But I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm trying to do what I feel is right. And so I felt like they handled it extremely well. And it just made me feel good to be heard. So just the experience.
Gosh, I love that. And, I think I've had like similar experiences that kind of makes me really, it triggers this, the experience that I had where previous company that I worked for, wanted to increase more opportunity. We wanted to increase more opportunities for people of color in the organization. So even though like DE&I work they're very like DE&I are very specific definitions of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Like to do D&I work is to do equity work. I do believe that. I believe that to do D&I work is to do equity work. And so is a part of it. Especially if you're trying to institutionalize the practice of diversity and inclusion. So when we were trying to increase access to those opportunities for there to be more Black researchers, but the ways in which we were pushing things out to the market was very siloed. And frankly, they were going to white spaces. So, by default, we were like, we were showing up at these college fairs. We were recruiting people, and it was just like, well, this is the best that we have because, you know, we didn't have any people of color who came back and were interested in these roles. And it's like, well, are you showing up at HBCUs? Are you going where there are a lot of programs that have Black people in them or people of color in them? And so I, similar to you, Chris, was tapped to be on a hiring board for the organization, and they did take, at least at the local level, take a lot of that feedback very seriously, and then thought, okay, let's put a line of fairs up at universities or schools or programs where we know that we can actually target people of color. Now I can't tell you, you know, I'll leave out like how serious I felt they were maybe after the fact, but like that was something that we did get a chance to implement right away, and it did change at least our sample and our pool of how many people of color we were able to provide access to this particular opportunity, who didn't even know that we existed, but had the skill set that was comparable to other researchers and technical assistant people in the organization. So I do think that those are small ways that equity can show up, just in terms of trying to institutionalize a better process of hiring, and getting people in to add to that diversity.
And, you know, I want to add to what you were saying, because I have seen some really good examples of this. So in terms of like building that talent pool, right? Because we know that 51% of young people of color lack early access to information about creative professions. So if we know that, right, then we know that there is going to be a disconnect in the skill level, right? So for me, I don't know if you all are familiar with Advancing Black Leaders. So Chase, basically what Chase did is they realized that the people of color, Black and brown people of color, they were not being able to gain access to financial industries because there was a disconnect in knowledge. So they created a space within Chase called Advancing Black Leaders, where they go around and recruit young Black people, bring them into this space, and teach them the skills that they need to go into financial industries. And that way they are able to recruit right from that space. And in my mind, you know, there's all this talk in Illinois and just really nationwide about the skills gap amongst like young people of color going into entertainment. And in my mind, I'm kind of like, okay, well, if there's a skills gap, then why are you all not doing the work of trying to put together a space where y'all can teach them how to do the work? In my mind, that is a real solution for equity.
And that's not even just in the workforce. You look at the sports space, right? There's no training programs for, and me and my boy Joe talk about this all the time. When Black kids go to school to play football, to play basketball, if they don't get a scholarship, right, they don't get to play. And so they don't get to stay in school and go through these training programs to be coaches. So you look at the NFL, you look at corporate, across the board, I think we have to create better, safe spaces to allow young adults to train, for sure.
I agree. I think the training platforms are key. They're paramount in community. Being able to have a space for young people to come and essentially like have a bit of like an apprenticeship. And it's not just about like these hard skills, and as you were mentioning, in terms of moving into the creative workforce and being educated about what's out there, but it's really a lot of these soft skills. I mean, like, how often are people taught workforce etiquette? Or like what is acceptable, and it doesn't mean that like you have to co-sign on every aspect of the etiquette that you're being taught, but just so that they are prepared for what they're going to be able to encounter, and then they can make that decision for themselves of, do I want to navigate or traverse this particular space versus another space? Do I want to create a space of my own? But you have a lot of times, many of us have had to learn through trial and error, or, I think coming from the home, my mom was super strict. And so I learned a lot about work ethic from like growing up in my own house. But, you know, if you don't have that type of foundation, then where do you learn it? You learn it on the job when you're being evaluated, and, you know, you're going to get the boot if you mess up. Right. So I think that there does need to be opportunities, more opportunities for young people to be in spaces to just learn and mess up. And I feel like where we are, there's not a whole lot of space for anybody to mess up these days at all, you know. And so that I definitely agree with you on that for sure.
I got a question, a interesting question, a curiosity. So one thing I really think about a lot is when young people go into workplaces where they are underrepresented, right?
Mm-hmm.
What do they need to be aware of? Like, how do you know? Like, how can you pinpoint what are some sorry.
Oh.
Sorry, I'm back, right?
You got
Okay.
Okay.
So, like I was saying, can you all name some things that young people can be aware of, like people can be aware of? Because I'll say this, like I used to work in like career coaching, helping young people transition into the workforce, and one of the things that I felt like we could have improved upon was giving young people the education to notice when the employer is doing something that is off, right? Like, oh snap, like, wait, is that right? Or is that right? You know, so I guess I'm just wondering, like, what are some things that you all could uplift that people could be on the lookout for, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you know, I feel like that's such a hard question because it's layered. It has so many different layers. And also, I think part of the culture that we're in, it brings a particular level of expectation that some of it is very real, and then some of it is like not, right? And so I think sometimes we have a skewed perception of what an experience is going to be when you step into a workplace, and that's a very real thing. So what I like to tell young people, and when I teach like workforce etiquette workshops, it's really like, you cannot do not assume that the people who you're working for, no matter how liberal, how kind, how much they look like you, that their values or their perspective aligns directly with yours. And I think that that's where we begin to get into trouble, because we make these assumptions about, okay, like this person is thinking like me and going to be receptive of all of those things, where sometimes people don't want to talk about politics in the workplace. Sometimes people don't want to talk about your religion. Sometimes people won't talk about the things that are really, really important to you. They just want to focus on the work. And so I think that that's something to really be mindful of, because so much of our personal life are pulled onto public platforms that we carry that with us everywhere we go. And in some spaces, it's not acceptable, right? So I think that that's something to really be mindful about, because that gets people, not just young people, all people, in trouble. I know you are shaking your heads. I'm sure that that you've seen that before. I think another thing that often comes up is recognizing that there's more than one way to accomplish something or achieve your goal. I think that that's something that's really important that I like to share with young people as well. You might I feel like I'm very proactive, but when I was a lot younger, I was more reactive to things. And that's just like kind of the environment that I came from, of like, okay, like I'm responding to these things as they come up. But like over time, what I began to realize is, by simply being in reactive mode, it didn't give me an opportunity to really be thinking very strategically about whether this path that I plan to take is going to achieve the goal that I want to achieve. So sometimes it's just like, this is the way that I feel, so I'm going to react in a moment. But like, if your end goal is to keep this job and to keep getting paid or to get this next opportunity, perhaps maybe you don't want to react in that way. Maybe you want to react or respond differently. And so I think some of it is really like these social cues and these social norms that we feel like, okay, it's knocking my ego, but like, bump your ego, like that ego isn't going to pay the bills, you know? And so I think it's really important. Those are two of the, there's so much more, but I think that those are the two big things that I stress to young people, that if you can understand those things relatively young or starting out, like, all other things you can get past in your career. But I think that those are the things that catch us off guard and become real barriers for us. We get in the way of ourselves. The third thing is really like to overcome yourself. You know, don't allow you to mess up an opportunity for you. And a lot of times we play the blame game and point fingers at other people, but like, you are the common denominator. And if somebody else is able to control you in such a way that pulls you out of character, and doesn't allow you to be your best self, how much control do you really have over who you are? So I think that those three big things I try to stress, and believe it or not, I talk to myself in the same way to remind myself of that each and every day.
You preaching today. You preaching today, sis.
I mean, there's so many things. There's so many things, but I think those three things, if you can start mastering and conquering those things, you are unstoppable. You really are.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
You know, one thing I heard there too. Uh-oh, we good? Y'all can hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Test. All right. The confidence, right? Like when we go into a new workplace, and especially as a young person that is learning something new, being around new people, I think it's so important that you find a support system too. Like, who's that person you're going to go to that you could trust, that after you get that weird feeling and you have that meeting and you walk out, like, who can you go to be like, yo, remember when this happened in the meeting? Like what do you think about that? You know, and not assuming right away all the time that things are negative, but also trying to ask questions too. And I know that's one thing I'm trying to get better at, is like, if you feel weird about something, take the time to ask the questions about why you're feeling weird to the person you're feeling weird with, and kind of get to the meat of that. And like you said, don't be scared to hold that back. So yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah, no, I love that you said that, because I think that is so important. Finding your tribe, you know, is really important. And part of that is, like you said, not making those assumptions about who is or who isn't, you know, because there's going to be, I think another big misnomer is that you're going to like all the people that you work with. And that's just simply not the case. You know, like, I've worked with so many people that I like to have great relationships with everybody I meet, but like, there are people who I'm just like, I don't really care for them at all. But like, I still have to work with them. I still have to get things done. This is just like in every aspect of, like, over a long period of time, in every aspect of your life. So I think if you can master working with somebody who you don't like, wow, you're doing well. It's easy to work with people who you don't like or who you like. But in that same vein that Chris was just mentioning, to be able to learn how to build, even with people who don't share your values, or don't look like you, or, you know, don't quite understand you, is where the real work can happen.
Yeah, I had a mentor who said to me once, you know, you're going to meet these personalities again. You're going to meet these personalities again. So if you learn how to work with them now, you know, if you learn how to work with them now, check that box off, because you're going to meet them along the road.
They're not going anywhere. There's no shortage of people who you won't like in the world. There isn't.
Yeah. So I wanna switch gears a little bit here, and kind of ask you, right? So something I have been like curious about is this disconnect between creative executives, right? Like creative executives, and then like these creatives on the ground, or these creatives on the come up. And my thought has really been, in what ways do you all envision these two groups working together? And then also, what do you think the work to identify? I'll stop there. How do you envision these two groups working together?
You know, I consider myself, you know, I still consider myself a creative on the come up. I feel like, you know, that like that I'm still there. I definitely don't consider there you go. Yes, Chris. I don't know if I've reached the pinnacle of success enough to call myself a creative executive, but I think what is needed is communication, is understanding, is mutual respect. You know, I have the privilege of working with a lot of creative execs, you know, and a lot of creatives on the come up. And I do think, similar to a generational disconnect, a lot of creative execs tend to be a little older, boomers or Gen Xers, a lot of creatives on the come up, although there are exceptions in each case. So I'm not like generalizing, but tend to be a lot of younger people who haven't had as much experience, but they're out here working, they're grinding, millennials, Gen Z. And I think that there's a lot of assumptions, like a lot of generational assumptions about their abilities, about what they can or can't do, or what they are willing to do, without enough time being taken to understand where they are, why they're where they are, and what is needed to get them to where you are as a creative executive. So I think that like that mutual understanding, that mutual respect, and that communication, as opposed to every little slip up that happens, you know, it's like a, you know, bad creative on the come up. You know, you don't get this opportunity anymore. And so I just kind of wish that there was a little bit more of that. But I think that that's really what's needed first and foremost, for those things to be connected.
What you think, Chris?
Understanding. When I look at a lot of the challenges in organizations, can y'all hear me? Uh-oh. Can y'all hear me?
Now I can hear.
All right, cool. When I look at what I said is, I liked what you said about the understanding piece and just really the communication. I think the secret to any good organization is how well you communicate, and any good relationship is how well you communicate. And part of that communication comes from understanding yourself first, right? And then you can understand someone else. And I mean, that wraps right into, you know, our scavenger hunt we have coming up on really understanding your narrative, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of communities out there that are living their narrative based off of a historical truth that wasn't told to them the right way. And so I think part of it is us understanding what our historical truth really is. And as we go into these workforces, you know, and look at how do we interact with these executives, having those real conversations with them. And the executives that are sitting in this kind of parochial conservative mindset, like stepping down from that a little bit and being like, oh, okay, let me get boots to the ground a little bit and really hear you, right? And not hear you at a boardroom. Let me get out to this event that's in your neighborhood and really feel what's going on and understand what's going on with you and your people in your community. And I think we have to have more of that understanding of our own narratives so that we can kind of have cross conversations between other races and cultures.
I agree. And I think that part of that also, I do want to acknowledge, because there are a fair amount of creative executives that want to help and want to be supportive and want to be mentors, but also, even, you know, as I mentioned on the other side, the creatives who are coming up also have to be willing to learn as well, and have to be coachable. I think that, like, you know, everybody makes you can make a I think like with anything there is, I think if you pick up a camera, then it's like, okay, I'm a photographer and that's cool. Study your craft, but study your craft and make sure that you're good at what you're doing. And when you step into an environment with photographers who've been doing this a lot longer than you, then you have to trust that they know a little something about what it is that they're talking about. So I do think that humility, that level, there's like a level of humility that's needed as well in order to get to the mutual understanding and the respect. Because I do think that there's a lot for us up and coming creators to learn, and we have to be willing to be vulnerable, to be flexible, to be coachable, to be wrong, and that's okay too. I do think that we are moving. We are also in a bit of a culture, as beautiful as it is, but that like, as I mentioned earlier, it's like not okay to be wrong. It's not okay to not know, but it is. It's okay to be wrong. It's okay to not know. It's okay to be ignorant. It's simply lack of knowledge. And that's when we begin to do some of that bridge building. But I think without that understanding, that communication, that vulnerability, we won't be able to build that bridge.
I just want to add, because I think, okay, so just listening to what you all are saying, two things are coming up for me. One being partnership, and then the other being service, right? So like I mentioned, like we were talking about before we went live, and I really, really want to highlight this thing that you're saying, Glennis, about what is really shaming, shaming for not knowing. Because me, as someone who recently started to really get serious about getting into entertainment and creativity, you get on all of these Zooms and you go to all of these meetings, and the first question somebody asks you is like, well, what do you do?
That's for, oh no, did we lose Mickey?
She'll pop back on.
Okay.
Mickey Gray.
Hold on.
Okay, cool.
That
was a very exciting question.
Nah, she'll pop back on.
Yeah, but that's kind of like where my thoughts are on that. But I do think it's incumbent on both parties to really do their part. But I do want to hear what you were saying. You were saying, so you hop on these calls and it's like, what do you do?
Yes. So you hop on these calls and you're in these spaces and everybody's like, well, what do you do? Who are you? And it's like, I don't know. I don't know, Glennis and Chris, if you all watch Insecure, but there was this one episode where the girls were like asking Issa, like, well, what do you do? And I got so nervous for her, because I have been in these spaces where it's like, you need to know. And I have just now grown the confidence to be like, and gotten the language to say, well, I'm learning. I'm learning. I'm trying to get a sense. And I think that is so important because, and I know me and you, Chris, we talked about this before, but I think the reason why that is so important is because a lot of the opportunities in arts, media, and entertainment are behind the scenes. And you can't see what you can't be. So you can't be what you can't see. So you need to take the time to learn. So that's one thing. And then in addition, y'all, I was in this Zoom call, right, with some really dope people. Like, I was in a Zoom call with Ethiopia at Half to Miriam. She's the president at Motown Records, and she also is like the VP at Universal Music Group. What's his name? Jay Irving was in this Zoom. Just like a lot of like creative executives. And the thing that I thought was so interesting, y'all, was that these people were having a conversation amongst one another about the challenges that they are experiencing in the workplace as creative executives, and the disconnect that they see. And when it came time for questions, the only thing I could think of to ask was, what should we be doing? Right? We need to be partnering. How can we help you all? What is the work that we need to be doing on the ground? Because if there are some people in the space and there are some people out of the space, we need to be partnering. So for me, I get it, right? That there are these conversations about well, what do I need to learn? What classes do I need to take? But I think that there could be some more conversations around how can we fight this fight together? Even if I'm not the CEO at whatever, even if I'm just sitting on my back porch having a conversation with you all. So yeah, that's something that I would really hope to see. I would really hope to see just more conversations between creative execs and creatives on the come up about what we can both be doing in our lane to achieve this diversity, equity and inclusion vision that we have. Bless you.
Thank you.
Bless you. Mickey, that sounds like an event.
Oh,
Oh,
I gotta get my connect.
It sounds like a round table, in 2021.
Man, we need it. Once I get my connects up, once I could call Ethiopia on the phone and be like, hey girl. Once I could call Melina Masukis and be like, hey girl, we need to come to Chicago, sis.
But here's the thing. So just what you said is the thing, and it's not to like single you out, but exactly what you said is actually the thing that creates the barrier, right? So like you just said you were on this call with some really important heavy hitters. That means those 6 degrees of separation have become like 1 degree. So there's like 1 degree of separation between you and those people on that call. Right? Who is that person? That's the person that you want to reach out to and say, hey, look, do you have a public email address or email address for this particular person? I would like to follow up. And just reaching up and say, hey, we were on this call, to the Zoom call together on this day, and this was what it was about. What really inspired me was what you said about this. Can we talk for like 20 minutes or half hour on the phone? I just like things. There you go. Right there. That's the beginning of cultivating a relationship. So it's really about seizing the moment and understanding what an opportunity looks like. And if somebody has got you on a call with somebody who you really love, and you're like, that means somebody has a direct contact and a direct line. So who do I need to talk to get a direct line to that person? It's that easy. It is that easy. And so we just have to lean into those moments and trust ourselves enough to know, hey, I'm good enough to be on a phone with Melina. I'm good enough to be on the call with Ethiopia. I'm good enough. We have to value ourselves to know this is the work that's required for us to get to that next step. And it takes people like you doing that.
Thank you. Thank you. And I want to say this before we jump to our next question, Chris, is that like you both talked about it. It really boils down to confidence, and it really boils down to creative confidence, right? Because if you don't have the confidence to be like, hey, I got something to say, and this is what I think, and this is how we should go about it. And there is grace and mercy for people, because I feel like the entertainment industry and the creative industry has been branded as such this like hardcore, like don't not know what you don't know. Come in here and know it all. That it can be challenging. So yeah, I just wanted to uplift that.
Yeah, I'm glad that you said that. I think that's a really big piece of the work. But also like a big piece of it is just doing the work, right? And like I don't want us to ever underestimate how valuable that is. We can go out and try to get these relationships all day until the cows come home. But once you get somebody at a table in a room, they're going to look at you like, what do you do? What is it that you have done? What have you produced? What do you have to show for it? So I think while we, not you, but proverbial you, are out like trying to cultivate these relationships, we also need to be doing the work that speaks for itself, so that when you walk in the room, your work precedes you, your presence precedes you, where people can say, oh, I'm familiar with all of these other things that you're doing. And before you even have to say anything, and then people will come looking for you. right? And so, yes, we look at Issa Rae, somebody like Issa Rae, who's really beautiful and dope, and I love Issa. And one day we're gonna be besties, and I'm gonna pull back to this recording and say, look, I called it years ago, and I just no, I was your friend. You knew I was your friend. Um, but if you think about her trajectory, and even back to Awkward Black Girl, she may have been knocking on Hollywood door in some kind of form, like creating content for herself, and that content got her, you know, an HBO deal with Insecure because she was focused on just doing the work, you know, not trying to get noticed, but like here's content that's needed, and like, and there was a whole following germinated from that. So I don't want us to miss how important it is to show up and do the work.
Yeah, I love that. When you look at that confidence, right, and as you're building something new, and you're as creatives, right, we're not going into this box and saying, okay, I'm gonna work in this job for 20 years. It's like, no, we're like this, and then this, and then this, right? How do young people, understanding those differences still, right, in the workplace, still build confidence, knowing that they are learning something new, they're around different people, and they're going to do something new in another 2 years? Like, how do you still continue to build confidence there?
Stop comparing yourself to other people. That's the first and biggest way to build confidence. And this is not just for young people. This is for everybody. Stop comparing yourself to other people, because as long as you're looking at what other people around you are doing, you're never going to be happy or take any kind of, you're never going to be happy you're present. I'll just say it like that, because sometimes you can make small growth and strides, but then you look around and you're like, it's still not enough. Well, if you didn't know anything about camera operation last year, and now you're operating, you know, a whole camera, you know, and a whole package with that, like, you've made some strides, like you're doing well. And granted, like, you're not, you know, a first AC or second AC on a set, but like, that's probably that can be the next step, right? And so that would just be my biggest piece of advice in terms of building confidence. Just stay in your lane, focus on your lane, focus on how to be the best that you can in your lane, and you will feel confident about what you're doing.
Yeah. To add to that, I would want to say, you know, I guess it's kind of like similar to what you're saying, but a little different in terms of keep your eyes on the prize. So, like, for example, I know one thing that I struggled with in the past and still struggle with. I'm not going to act like I'm over it. Still struggle with, and I know a lot of other young people struggle with, is, oh my God, I need to be doing something 100,000% different, right? Like, I can't do this because they're doing this. You know,
right.
I can't strive to reach this because this already exists. So
right.
I need to be doing something else. And
right.
I had to come to the realization that, like, so a friend of mine had mentioned to me, I was telling her about this kind of thought that I was having. And she was like, well, if people don't need that thing anymore, or if that's already done, then why do you think people keep coming to you and asking for it? Why do you think people keep coming to you and asking for it? And I was like, wow, you're right. You know, we all put our unique spin on things. So just keeping your eye on the prize and not being concerned that somebody else is doing something almost similar to what you're doing. Nothing under the sun is original at this point.
Not at this point. And I mean, it might be something that's beautiful and innovative, and it, you know, for sure, I do think that there are new ideas and concepts being posted every day. But I do think that there's an algorithm to a strategy to success, even though everybody has different lanes. And so I definitely agree with that. And I love that you said that, because it really makes me think about one of the most important ways of like building young people's confidence as well is around branding yourself, understanding that like you are a brand, right? And I think that like we see this with people like Beyonce or Jay-Z. you're not really buying the music, right? Like you're buying whatever it is that they are selling. It doesn't matter. Like Beyonce could go repackage water and people would buy it for $20 a bottle, you know, because it represents something that they feel a sense of connection and belonging to. Right.
Yeah.
And so when you think about that, like what is the thinking lane that you can create a sense of connection and belonging to, where people know that I don't Bernice or Chris or Mickey for that. That's the if I leave their space, I feel great. I feel my cup is filled, and we can only get that by focusing on the things that you're doing.
You know, I try to tell the young people that I coach. For some reason, y'all, I have not yet arrived at this liking of being a brand. Like every time I think of a brand, I think of, this gonna sound crazy, but I think of slavery and I think of cows. I think of slavery and cows. That's the number two things that I think. But what I do encourage young people to recognize that they are a business. Hey, everything okay, Glennis? Do you see Glennis, Chris?
Yeah, she looks like she might be frozen. I can hear you, Mickey.
Hold on. Let's give her a second.
All right. We're just waiting for host.
Boom, you back.
Come on.
Can you hear us, Glennis?
Well, if you're still watching,
we are.
I'm here.
Are you hearing?
I was like, okay, they'll appear.
You here?
Do I do a dance?
Can you hear us? Okay.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Cool. But yeah, I was saying how I do try to encourage people to encourage young people and people in general that like you are a business. Every single part of you, like, monetize your value. For example, I work with this one young lady and she is an amazing singer, but every single time I talk to her, I remind her, like, girl, you can model. Girl, you are beautiful. You are photogenic. You are likable. You are empathetic. Like, monetize your value in whatever way you can. And I think now branding really boils down to, what is your message? Same thing. What do you want to show the world? So, like, if you take, for example, Beyonce, I just been researching her, y'all. So everything Beyonce is about, like, women empowerment and being a boss woman, you know, and people buy into Beyonce because they want to be that. Same with Rihanna, right? Inclusivity, beauty, and like non-conformity, not caring, right? Like people that. So I think leading with those things are so important nowadays and building your confidence.
I love that you said that, because the fact that you were able to boil it down to both of them in just a few words, like, lets us know that they're doing a great job of branding themselves, right? So like, what is it that we want people to think of us? You know, when people are like, oh, Glennis, when they say, like, I want to be thinking more critically of, like, what are the 3 words that people are going to represent for me? And that, like, I want it to be a reflection of that which is near and dear, and that which I actually think is true, as opposed to it being something completely different. I think if Beyonce and Rihanna were right here in the room, they both would be like, yep, that's the brand. You got it. I'm doing a great job. You know, I have to put myself on the back. So I think that I love that you use those examples. I think that that's where young people can start to think about, what is it that you represent? Like, what is your message? What is your message?
What is your message?
Yeah.
I love
it. Yeah.
Coming up on time. Anybody want to add? Y'all can hear me?
Yeah.
We're coming up on time. Any of y'all want to add any last closing remarks, any statements, any shout outs to anybody you want to just give love to?
I mean, I just want to say thank you both for having me on the show, and shout out to both of you for the dope work that each of you are doing in the city respectively. I love it, and I'm grateful to be in the company of both of you. But I do want to give a shout out to the people out here who are working, creatives who are organizing, creatives who are just making things, who are doing their best to like put their best self forward, like people who have decided that they don't want to conform and they want to be great and they want to work hard, but they don't want to play by anybody else's rules to be successful. Like shout out to them too, because I feel like they always get left behind and are not acknowledged. And people think that they're just like rebels for the sake of being rebels, but it's really because what they are seeing hasn't been working. Right. And so they're like, if this is not working and I'm going to give my time and attention to it, I might as well like go be brave and take a leap and see what happens for myself, so shout out to them too. So, and shout out to the young people trying to pave their own way. I just want to say, and our creative executives who are trying to pave ways for young people. So all of the shout outs that I want to give to the world.
Yeah. I definitely just want to thank you, Glennis, for coming on and giving us this hour of your time today. Really, really, really appreciate having this conversation with you, and really also appreciate the hard work that you're doing. I know going to school and trying to live this life at the same time, bills, corona, all this stuff is just a lot all at once. So I definitely want to say thank you to you for giving us this hour. And I just want to uplift, reiterate what we just mentioned in terms of I think why people like Beyonce and Rihanna have done such a great job is because they know who they are, and then they figured out who they were first, and then shifted the perception. So that doesn't it sound like an amazing thing for you to be perceived as who you actually are?
Yes,
yes.
Sound
like that would be great and just feel like heaven on earth.
It is, and the biggest part of that is controlling your narrative. I think that's the last thing that I'll end on is don't tell your own story. Otherwise, somebody else will tell it for you. It won't be as great, probably won't be as glamorous, probably will be a little shady, So like, make sure that if you have a narrative, which everybody does, and you choose to share it, that let it be your own. Like, let it be on your own terms, even when you're working within somebody else's structure. I think there's always opportunities to be your best self and to shine your light on the world.
Yep,
I love it. Well, listen, y'all, thank you, Mickey, as always. Thank you for being a blessing in disguise. Glennis, thank you for coming on and just sharing your heart with us.
Thank you.
Kids out there, young adults out there listening, be confident, be yourself as you go out there, and don't conform to any structure or system, because the system is broken. So make a new system, y'all. And we're doing that together as we really try and impact community right now as we build these relationships here. So again, just very appreciative to have both of y'all on. One thing I always like to say, and I'll kind of end it with this, in order to follow your dreams, you got to really put your passion first. So thank y'all. I love y'all both. And
thanks so much, Chris. Thanks. I'll take
Thanks, Mickey.
All right, y'all.
Peace, y'all. All right.